Shalom, Aleichem. Peace be upon you and welcome back to the broadcast. I'm Shawn. Website, scriptureandprophecy.com. That's where you go to find the archives, and that's where you go to support this mission of truth. Today, the portion that we are looking at is entitled Mishpatim. Let me give you the portion summary real quick from torahportions.org. The 18th reading from the Torah is named Mishpatim, which means judgments. The title comes from the first words of the first verse of the reading, which could be literally translated to say, "And these are the judgments which you will place before them." Exodus 21:1. The first 3 chapters of this Torah portion deliver a legal code of laws and commandments that form the nucleus for the Torah laws. The last chapter tells the stories of how the people of Israel consented to keep the laws and entered into a covenant relationship with God through a series of rituals conducted by Moses. So what we're reading today is Exodus 21 through 24. And keep in mind, we're still at Mount Sinai, and we have this long list of right rulings that's being given. Interestingly enough, this coming weekend when we do our lectionary study, we're going to be studying a passage out of Luke, which deals with the golden rule. Do to others as you would have them do to you. And you will see Jesus talking about this whole thing of you kind of get back what you put in regards to how you deal and love people. And really, I think that today's Torah portion is saying the same thing. It's really the mandate of compassion, the law of compassion. That's really what's being put forth here. It's demonstrating that God cares about the smallest details of how you treat one another, how you treat animals. You'll see a commandment, do not, boil a kid in its mother's milk. Like, God cares about the way in which you do things. Like, there's a proper, compassionate, loving way to deal with creatures, to deal with creation, to deal with other human beings, to deal with your own servants. All of these things God cares about. And there's a reward and judgment for not doing it the right way. That's just kind of like part of the natural law of the world. And I think that's what Jesus is getting at, and we'll talk more about that on Sunday morning. And, God mandates that, hey, what you do to others is going to come back on you, right? Like, if you steal from someone, then guess what? You're going to work until that's paid off. If you murder someone, you will be put to death. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Open up your hearts this morning. We could all use a little more compassion, especially in how we deal with one another, and even the more so when we talk about how we deal with our fellow brothers and sisters in the faith. One of the great tragedies that I see, especially online, is how people interact with one another. They call themselves believers. They say, I follow the Lord Jesus, and I watch how they talk to one another, how they talk to me sometimes, and all I see is a lot of arrogance, pride. I think sometimes when it comes to online communication, people think of themselves as NPCs and other people as nothing more than a avatar, and it's created some cruelty. I think what we'll learn today is that God cares about the smallest details in how we interact with one another. I've taken up enough time to do an introduction. I do want to say one last thing. Thank you for praying for me. I'm starting to improve health-wise this week. But it may hinder the podcast a little bit this morning as far as my voice and things like that are concerned, so I apologize for that in advance. Let's dig in. Mishpatim, Exodus 21 through 24. Hallelujah, Scriptures. And these are the right rulings, which you are about to put before them. When you buy an Ivri servant, that's to say a Hebrew servant, he serves 6 years, and in the 7th he goes out free for naught. If he comes in by himself, he goes out by himself, and if he comes in married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master has given him a wife, and she has borne him sons or daughters, the wife and her children are her master's, and he goes out by himself. And if the servant says, I love my master, my wife, and my children, let me not go out free, then his master shall bring him before Elohim, and shall bring him to the door, or to the doorpost, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and shall serve him forever. And when a man sells his daughter to be a female servant, she does not go out as a male servants do. If she is displeasing in the eye of her master, who has engaged her to himself, then he shall let her be ransomed. He shall have no authority to sell her to a foreign people because of him deceiving her. And if he has engaged her to his son, he is to do to her as his right of his daughters. If he takes another, her food, her covering, and her marriage rights are not to be diminished. And if he does not do these 3 for her, then he shall go out for naught without silver. He who strikes a man, please note, this whole first introduction about how you interact with servants or slaves, it's not what people think it is. And I'm not going to go into detail about it this morning for time's sake, and I don't know how much of my voice I'm going to have this morning. But if you want, you can go back to last year's. Just go to the YouTube channel, type in Mishpatim, you'll see 2024s, and I spend 15 minutes lighting this topic up. So if that's something you're interested in, you can find it in last year's episode. This year, I just want to read the portion and let it speak to you. Continuing on here. He who strikes a man so that he dies shall certainly be put to death. But if he did not lie in wait, but Elohim delivered him into his hand, then I shall appoint for you a place where he is to flee. But when a man acts presumptuously against his neighbor to kill him by treachery, you are to take him even from my altar to die. So see, please note, there's a difference between punishment for outright murder and accidental manslaughter, if that makes sense. The murder, you are to be put to death. The manslaughter, you are to be exiled from the people because they're probably going to try to kill you. But you're not to be executed. 2 different things. Verse 15, and he who smites his father or his mother shall certainly be put to death. Please note, God takes it very seriously about honoring your parents. It's one of the commandments, right? If you smite your father or your mother, you will be put to death. See, the law here is mandating that compassion. The law here is mandating through repercussions to tutor you, to teach you what it means to walk in righteousness. He who kidnaps a man and sells him, or if he is found in his hand, shall certainly be put to death. And he who curses his father or his mother shall be put to death. And when men strive together, and one smites the other with a stone or with his fist, and he does not die, but is confined to his bed, if he rises again and walks about outside with his staff, then he who smote him shall be innocent. He only pays for the lost time, and sees to it that he is completely healed. So if you injure somebody, guess what? That lost time and everything that person went through is now your financial responsibility. You injured them. And when a man smites his male or female servants with a rod so that he dies under his hand, he shall certainly be avenged. But if he remains alive a day or 2, he is not avenged, for he is his property. That's a tough one, isn't it? Let's continue on. And when men strive, and they shall smite a pregnant woman, and her children come out, yet there is no injury, he shall certainly be punished accordingly, as the woman's husband lays upon him, and he shall pay by the judges. But if there is injury, then you shall give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, and lash for lash. And of course, Jesus will come along and teach a different principle, won't he? Like he's saying, Jesus will come along and say, the law, mandates eye for an eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, as one of my servants, don't require that of the other person. Instead, turn the other cheek. You see, this is the law for operating Israel and the Israelites and how they are to be judged and deal with one another. But you could turn the other cheek, right? And not demand that? And when a man smites the eye of his male servant or female servant and destroys it, he is to let him go free for the sake of his eye. Look, man, I keep going back to this. It's a law of compassion. If you smite your female servant or your male servant and they lose their eye, first of all, you hit them. They lost something. They go free for the sake of their eye. And if he knocks out the tooth of his male servant or female servant, he is to let him go free for the sake of his tooth. And when an ox gores a man or a woman to death, then the ox shall certainly be stoned, and its flesh is not eaten, and the owner of the ox is innocent. However, if the ox was previously in a habit of goring, and its owner has been warned, and he has not kept it confined, so that it has killed a man or a woman, the ox is stoned, and its owner shall also be put to death. Think about it like this. Imagine you have a dog. This is probably more relatable to modern times. So you have a dog that's been in the habit of biting people. Well, you've been warned. You know your dog is dangerous. And then it attacks and kills someone. Guess what? That's you. You did that. You knew the animal was a danger to others. You didn't take the necessary steps to make sure that people weren't going to get hurt. And now your dog has killed someone. You get put to death. If it was a freak thing that happened once, the law says, okay, freak accident, you're innocent. But if it were to happen again, you knew better. And you were to be put to death as well. That's kind of the scenario here. We have an ox that's in the habit of goring people. If a sin covering is laid upon him, then he shall give the ransom of his life, whatever is laid on him. Whether it has gored a son or gored a daughter according to this right ruling, it is done to him. If the ox gores a male or female servant, he is to give their master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox is stoned. And when a man opens a pit, or if a man digs a pit and does not cover it, and an ox or a donkey falls in it, the owner of the pit is to repay. He is to give silver to their owner, and the deed is his. And when the ox of a man smites the ox of his neighbor, and it dies, then they shall sell the live ox and divide the silver from it, and also divide the dead ox. Or if it was known that the ox was previously in the habit of goring, and its owner has not kept it confined, he shall certainly repay ox for ox, while the dead is his. It's just do what is right. I mean, we all know deep in our spirit, this is the right thing to do. My ox killed your ox. I didn't have it locked up. The spirit within you should be saying, obviously the right thing to do is to pay this man back for his loss. Like this is, again, I'm just going to say it one last time because I don't want to beat it to death. What's being mandated here, what this law is here, is the law of compassion. How you treat one another. God cares. When a man steals an ox or sheep and shall slaughter it or sell it, he repays 5 cattle for an ox, and 4 sheep for a sheep. If a thief is found breaking in, and he is smitten so that he dies, there is no guilt for his bloodshed. Yeah, if somebody enters your home in the night to injure you, rob you, or kill you, and that thief ends up dead as a result of his poor judgment, that's on him, it's not on you. If the thief is found breaking in and he is smitten so that he dies, there is no guilt for his bloodshed. If the sun has risen on him, there is guilt for his bloodshed. He shall certainly repay. If he has not met the means, then he shall be sold for his theft. If the theft is indeed found alive in his hand, whatever it is, an ox or a donkey or a sheep, he repays double. I love this. You steal, now you owe twice that. When a man lets a field or vineyard be consumed and lets loose his livestock and it feeds in another man's field, he repays from the best of his own field and the best of his own vineyard. When fire breaks out and spreads to thorn bushes so that it slacked gain or standing grain or the field is consumed, he who kindled the fire shall certainly repay. When a man gives silver or goods to his neighbor to guard and then it is stolen out of the man's house, if the thief is found, he repays double. If the thief is not found, then the master of the house shall be brought before Elohim to see whether he has put his hand into the neighbor's goods. For every matter of transgression, for ox or donkey, for sheep or garment, or whatever is lost, which another claims to be his, let the matter of them come before Elohim. And whomever Elohim declares wrong repays double to his neighbor. When a man gives to his neighbor a donkey or an ox or a sheep or any beast to watch over, and it dies or is injured or is driven away while no one is looking, let an oath of Jehovah be between them, that he has not put his hand into the neighbor's goods, and that the owner of it shall accept that he does not repay. But if it is indeed stolen from him, he repays to its owner. If it is torn to pieces, let him bring it for evidence. He does not repay what was torn. And when a man borrows from his neighbor, and it is injured or dies while the owner of it is not present, he shall certainly repay. But if his owner was with it, he does not repay. If he was hired, he is entitled to the hire. And when a man entices a maiden who is not engaged and lies with her, he shall certainly pay the bride price for her to be his wife. Yeah, you see, in God's culture, you can't just shack up. You entice a young woman, you woo her, and you make all these promises to her, and then you take from her something as precious as her virginity. Guess what? You owe the bride price. You treated her as though she was going to be your wife. Now she gets to be. If her father absolutely refuses to give her to him, he pays according to the bride price of maidens. Do not allow a practitioner of witchcraft to live. Can't have that in your culture. Can't have people practicing witchcraft. Or you end up with what we have here in America. Anyone lying with a beast shall certainly be put to death. He who slaughters to a mighty one except to Jehovah only is put under a ban. Do not tread down a sojourner or oppress him, for you were sojourners in the land of Mishpatim. This is about how you treat the stranger among you. This is not to say that there's not laws about how a stranger enters into your land. This is about the personal responsibility of you as an individual and how you treat another human being. Do not afflict any widow or fatherless child. If you do afflict them at all, if they cry out to me at all, I shall certainly hear their cry. Don't you love that? God says, if I hear the cry of a widow, if a widow cries out to me, a child who's lost his father cries out to me, I'm going to hear that. I'm going to hear that cry. And my wrath shall burn, and I shall slay you with the sword, for your wives shall be widows, and your children fatherless. If you do not lend silver to any of my people, the poor among you, you are not to be like that who lends on interest to him. Do not lay interest on him. If you take your neighbor's garment as a pledge at all, you are to return it to him before the sun goes down. For that is his only covering. It is his garment for his skin. What does he sleep in? And it shall be that when he cries to me, I shall hear, for I show favor. God cares how we treat one another. This is really the Lord's compassion. Do not revile Elohim, nor curse a ruler of your people. Do not withhold your produce and your juice. Give me the firstborn of your sons. Likewise, you are to do with your oxen and your sheep, and it is to be with its mother 7 days. And on the 8th day you give it to me. And you are He cares about... Look, he knows that the animals love their young. Have you ever seen a cat, how it treats its kittens? God is saying, don't remove those. Don't separate those for 8 days. Like, don't be so cruel. And you are Kodesh Min to me. That means hallowed, set apart. You do not eat any meat which is torn into pieces in the field. You throw it to the dogs. Do not bring a false report. Do not put your hand with the wicked to be a malicious witness. Do not follow a crowd to do evil, nor bear witness in a strife, so as to turn aside after many, to pervert. Do not favor a poor man in his strife. When you meet your enemy's ox or your donkey's going astray, you shall certainly return it to him. God cares even how you treat your enemies. See, you read this where Jesus says, love your enemies. And we say, this is just so contrary to God's law. Is it? God's law right here says if you see your enemy's donkey, return it to him. When you see the donkey of him who hates you lying under its burden, you shall refrain from leaving it to him. You shall certainly help him. Do not turn aside the right ruling of your poor in his strife. Keep yourself far from a false matter, and do not kill the innocent and the righteous, for I do not declare the wicked right. Do not take a bribe, for a bribe blinds the seeing one and twists the words of the righteous. Do not oppress a sojourner as yourselves when you know the life of a sojourner, because you were sojourners in the land of Mishpatim. Again, how do you treat the stranger in your land? And for 6 years you are to sow your land and shall gather its increase. But in the 7th year you are to let it rest, and you shall leave it, and the poor of your people shall eat. And what they leave, the beasts of the field eat. Do the same with your vineyard and your olive yard. 6 days you are to do your work, and on the 7th day you rest, in order that your ox and your donkey might rest, and the son of your female servant and the sojourners may be refreshed. Please note, the Sabbath wasn't just about you. We think it's about, God wants to force me to rest. That's part of it. But it's also so you can't burden your servants and your employees. I remember when I was a little kid that almost nothing was open on Sunday morning. Do you guys remember that? Here in America? The whole nation just kind of observed like the Protestant view of the Lord's Day, the Sabbath according to the Protestant view. And if you wanted gas, you better get it Saturday night, because you wasn't getting it on Sunday. Now look what we do. Everybody's working on Sunday. There's no rest for anyone. No mandated rest. Are we better off for it? Or worse off for it? It was not just about us. It was about making sure we couldn't abuse the people who are under our authority. Verse 13, and in all that I have said to you, take heed, and make no mention of the name of another mighty one. Let it not be heard from your mouth. 3 times in the year you are to celebrate a festival to me. Guard the festival of Matzot. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. And I command you, and at the time I've appointed in the mouth of Aviv, for in it you came out of Mitzrayim for the month of Aviv. And you do not appear before me empty-handed. And the festival of the harvest, the first fruits of your labors which you have sown in the land, and the festival of the ingathering and the outgoing of the year, when you have gathered in the fruit of your labors from the field. 3 times in a year all your males are to appear before the Adon Jehovah. Do not offer the blood of my slaughtering with leavened bread, and the fat of my festival shall not remain until morning. Bring the first of the first fruits of your land into the house of Jehovah your Elohim. Do not cook a young goat in its mother's milk. I've made this argument before, but I'll just very briefly make it again. This has nothing to do with dairy on your cheeseburger. This has to do with how you treat creation. To do something like this is so foul, so evil. To boil a young goat in its mother's milk, how terrible. It's about how you treat creation, how you treat the creature. That's what's going on here, in my opinion. See, I am sending a messenger before you to guard you in the way and to bring you into the place which I have prepared. Be on guard before him and obey his voice. Do not rebel against him, for he is not going to pardon your transgression, for my name is in him. But if you diligently obey his voice and shall do all that I speak, then I shall be an enemy of your enemies and a disaster to those who distress you. For my messenger shall go before you and shall bring you to the Amorites and to the Hittites and the Pezerites and to the Canaanites and to the Hivites and to the Jebusites, and I shall cut them off. Do not bow down to their mighty ones, nor serve them, nor do according to their works, but without fail overthrow them, and without fail break down their pillars. And you shall serve Jehovah your Elohim, and he shall barak, that means bless your bread and your water, and I shall remove sickness from your midst. None shall miscarry or be barren in your land. I shall fill the number of your days. I shall send my fear before you and cause confusion among the people to whom you come, and to make all your enemies turn their backs to you. And I shall send hornets before you, and you shall drive out the Hivites and the Canaanites and the Hittites from before you. And I shall not drive them out from before you in 1 year, lest the land become a waste and the beasts of the field become too numerous for you. Little by little I shall drive them out before you, until you have increased and you inherit the land. And I shall appoint your border from the sea of reeds to the sea of the Pelashites, and from the wilderness to the river, for I shall give the inhabitants of the land into your hand, and you shall drive them out before you. Do not make a covenant with them, nor their mighty ones. Let them not dwell in your land, lest they make you sin against me when you serve their mighty ones, when it becomes a snare to you. See, the issue was not that you weren't allowed to have laws about people being in the land. The issue was about how are you treating the sojourner, this stranger who's, think of a temporary traveling through, or somebody who's come in through the right customs and laws. But God is making the point that if you start letting these people just become part of the land, become part of your culture, there's going to be a change. They're going to make you against me, he says. Let them not dwell in your land, lest they make you sin against me. He's specifically dealing with these pagans, though. He's specifically dealing with these pagan surrounding areas where they worship these false gods and they sacrifice children to their false gods and they do all these terrible, wicked things. He's saying, do not bring that into your culture. That's what it's really about here. And Moshe, he said, come up to Jehovah, you and Aaron, Naviv and Abahu, and 70 of the elders of Israel, and you shall bow yourselves from a distance. But Moshe shall draw near to Jehovah by himself, and let them not draw near, nor let the people go up with him. And Moshe came and related to the people all the words of Jehovah and all the right rulings, and all the people answered with one voice and said, all the words which Jehovah has spoken, we shall do. And Moshe wrote down all the words of Jehovah, and rose up early in the morning, and built an altar at the foot of the mountain, and 12 standing columns for the 12 tribes of Israel. And he sent young men and of the children of Israel, and they offered burnt offerings and slaughtered peace slaughterings of bulls to Jehovah. And Moshe took half the blood and put it in the basins, half the blood, and sprinkled it on the altar. And he took the book of the covenant, and he read in the hearing of the people. And they said, all that Jehovah has spoken, we shall do and obey. How was God's word communicated to the people? I believe I did a short on this last week. It was read in the hearing of the people, just like we're doing now. And Moshe took the blood and sprinkled it on the people and said, see the blood of the covenant which Jehovah has made with you concerning all these words. And Moshe went up, and also Aaron, Nadav, and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Yisrael. And they saw the Elohim of Yisrael under his feet, like a paved work of sapphire stone, and like the Shemayim, that is to say, the heavens, for brightness. Yet he did not stretch out his hand against the chiefs of the children of Israel. And they saw Elohim, and they ate and they drank. And Jehovah said to Moshe, come up to me on the mountain, and be there while I give you tablets of stone, and the Torah and the commandment which I have written to teach them. And Moshe arose with his assistant Yahushua, and Moshe went up to the mountain of Elohim. And he said to the elders, wait here for us until we come back to you. And see, Aaron and Hur are with you. Whoever has matters, let him go with to them. And Moshe went up to the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain, and the esteem of Jehovah dwelt on Mount Sinai. And the cloud covered it for 6 days, and on the 7th day he called to Moshe, and out of the midst of the cloud. And the appearance of the esteem of Jehovah was like a consuming fire on the top of the mountain, before the eyes of the children of Israel. And Moshe went into the midst of the cloud, went up into the mountain, and it came to be that Moshe was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. And that is the end of the study for this morning. All that Jehovah has said we shall do. They're so excited to obey, but can they remain faithful for a measly 40 days without Moses? If you know the story, you know the answer to that question. So we're going to go from this great, amazing experience to a great tragedy. But you'll have to wait till next week if you're not familiar with the story. I pray you've been blessed this morning. I hope that my voice issue and all of that didn't come through too much. Thank you for listening, and thank you for praying for me and supporting the podcast. I'm just so blessed to be able to do this, and I'm just so grateful for all of you as well. And I really, really do long for this podcast to be a blessing to all of you listening this morning. Peace and grace be with all of you. And until next time, God bless.